The morning after the meeting with Ben, Costello woke up and went over Catherine's @Dollscar's profile again. Things he missed previously started to surface. In 2018, there were huge gaps with no activity and regurgitation of old photos from Los Angeles. From 2020 to 2022, photo content picked up and she was much more active again. It seemed odd now that this would be when she increased her content, since there had been waves of business closures due to the pandemic. Most of her photos were her wearing a mask, but there were several photos out in public without a mask. Costello honed in on these images and found a noticeable hair length difference, as though these were old photos as well. He zoomed in on each one, trying to pinpoint locations, and couldn't find a single Southern California landmark in any of them. He searched her follower and following list for anyone named Catherine. He suspected, as bizarre as she may be, she may have felt compelled to follow her alt pseudonym account. He didn't find her. He began to notice there was no consistency with the accounts she followed or the ones following her. This account was a full-fledged burner account she was using to fish around Costello's pond. He finally just typed in Catherine Preen. He found her account. It was private. However, the bio showed a geotag of Olympia, Washington. He did an internet search of her. She was no longer a contracted journalist. She'd been tagging along with shady private investigators for any payment she could squeak out of them. He made up his mind. No more conversations with @Dollscars. She's too much of a risk. It was time to dive into his own head and find what's been tucked away for the last 7 years. Shit was settling in really heavy. Costello not only knows he's associated in some way to the death of 2 people he doesn't know, but now he's fairly sure he's possibly the target of a private investigation. It's been years since Seattle Police Department closed the case cold. He wasn't a huge Dateline consumer, but he knew it wasn't uncommon for families of decedents to hire private firms to continue looking for leads to give them closure. Honestly, he was wide open to giving them closure himself. The thought of coming clean didn't scare him as much as the weight of the unknown did. He just kept imagining himself walking into Seattle Police Department and saying he's the weirdo in the hoodie doing the odd choreography in front of the mural at Hellas Liquor, and pissing off the detectives because he had no recollection of the evening since he drank every drop of tequila in town. He doesn't know where he went that night, whether he was in the studio, if his DNA could be found anywhere, or if he would be wasting their time. The only evidence that would definitely help he threw away years ago. The hoodie and shorts with the stranger's blood on them was probably 20 feet deep in a landfill by now. If he's the murderer, he's the most cunning and clever one ever, and he pulled it off during a full-blown blackout. His ridiculous meticulousness won't allow him to turn himself in as a walking pile of circumstantial, self-incriminating whatnot. He could just see himself being escorted out of the precinct because they've been quite satisfied with their case remaining cold and closed. If he can tie up these loose ends with any memories he's had filed away, then he can make better sense of his admission, if he has one. After watching episode 3 of the series, he started half watching the rest because after seeing himself, he couldn't quite focus. There were additional details in following episodes that could help him compile a strategy. He'll give the remainder of the series a watch one more time and then stock up on booze and other staples because he's in for another sheltering in place that lasts as long as it chooses. Costello has no control over it once it begins. As much as it troubled him to do it, he opened his crypto app and unlocked his safe for his hard wallet. He needed to unload some Ethereum into his bank account in case he needs more time off than his employer would give him. He had a pretty voluminous surplus of paid leave until the pandemic back in 2020. In the beginning, there were paycheck protection loans and legislation covering time off, plus extensions on unemployment, but the federal chair realized it would most certainly impact Social Security. And the last thing a Democratic administration needed was to be the reason boomers got shafted on the money they'd paid into their entire lives. Costello didn't have too much contact with his job, but needed a co-working space because he was terrified working from home. He feared it would lead to more waves of agoraphobia and alcoholism. When the co-working spaces closed in accordance with state guidelines, he took leaves from work and went on small cycling tours. This kept him focused and outdoors. It may have burned a majority of his leave time, but also saved him from darkness. Here's to life giving you lemons, the 6 odd sides of a dodecahedron, and the irony in thanking a God you don't believe in after a near-death experience. Costello rattled off a prelude to his next chapter. He gave that toast a second pass through his head. I'm ready, he told himself.